Hey! Hi, how you doing? This is the Gamertron and welcome back to the Gamertron Show, and if you've been following my channel, watching my videos for some time now, I'm sure it's no secret by now that I'm a huge Warhammer nerd. Whether it be the sci-fi of 40k or the fantasy of classic Warhammer, I'm a big fan of this franchise. And this universe, this lore, is just ripe with potential for making great video games, and great video games have been made utilizing the Warhammer IP. We have the Dawn of War trilogy, Space Marine, End Times, Vermintide, and many more, including last year's Total War Warhammer, which was one of my top 10 favorite games of 2016. And I have to admit, I was very surprised to hear that the sequel was coming out just a year later, with Total War Warhammer 2. I'll admit, when the sequel was first announced, I was very skeptical. Announcing and releasing the game only 1 year after its predecessor? Total War Warhammer 2 was going to have to do something very impressive and exciting. Holy fuck, there's Lizardmen in the game. Holy fuck, there's Skaven in the game. Alright, I'm hyped, I'm on board. So after much waiting and much anticipation on my end, I have finally played Total War Warhammer 2, and I'm going to talk about it. First up, full disclosure, I am biased as hell when it comes to this video game. I've already told you I'm a massive Warhammer nerd. However, two of my favorite races, two of my favorite factions in the Warhammer universe, the Lizardmen and the Skaven, are in the same video game, so I'm going to be remarkably biased. Maybe Total War Warhammer 2 has some glaring flaws in it that I'm just not seeing because I'm so overwhelmed by happiness when I play the game. I will absolutely admit that. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about the game itself. First off, when it comes to visuals and graphics, the first Total War Warhammer had some pretty good visuals, pretty solid graphics, but what was most impressive was the animation and sound. Now the impressive animation and sound returns in full force. Everything looks and sounds authentic and real to the Warhammer universe, especially the sounds and animations for the various creatures and monsters. The developers of the game, Creative Assembly, simply have an absolutely phenomenal animation team on their hands. Even if you don't particularly like RTS video games, real-time strategy games, I wholeheartedly believe that everyone can appreciate the quality of animation and sound design on display in Total War Warhammer 2. It really is high-quality stuff. And while Total War Warhammer 2 is running on the same graphics engine as the first Total War Warhammer, there have been some noticeable improvements and updates, especially to lighting and texture work. Which is impressive because the lighting and texture work in the first game was pretty solid overall. Even though they aren't massive improvements from the first game, they are noticeable. However, one downside on the graphics and visual side of things, and one thing that hasn't been improved from the first Total War Warhammer, is the special effects. Lightning, water, fire, magic, smoke, gas. It's surprisingly low detail, and the low quality of the special effects is really contrasted when compared to the texture work and environmental detail of the textures and the environments and the characters, and of course the stellar animation and sound design. Everything else about the game just looks so damn good that the special effects stick out like a sore thumb. That was one of my only issues and dislikes about the first Total War Warhammer, and it's a shame that it persists into 2. But it's literally only one aspect out of the whole visual graphical package, which for the absolute most part is awesome. Now we come to a subject, a topic, an aspect of the game that was completely lacking in its predecessor and is a major improvement from Total War Warhammer 1 to 2. There's an actual fucking story! There's actual genuine characters to care about. There's a narrative. There's plot twists, which was completely lacking in the original Total War Warhammer. Yes, we had campaigns, and it could be argued that you're creating your own story as you're trying to conquer the world as one of the different lords and factions. And while I wholeheartedly agree, the lack of an actual narrative, the lack of an actual cohesive plot that glued everything together was a big downside for me with the first Total War Warhammer. Having fantastic visuals and great gameplay is superb, but not having a narrative, not having a solid, concrete ending or credits to chase after, a sense of climax, a sense of finality, That goes a long way in player engagement. I'm so happy. It's so awesome to see that Creative Assembly actually implemented a story this time. They didn't have to. They could have done the exact same thing they did with the first Total War Warhammer, and it still would have been well received. I still would have loved it. But this adds just so much more value, so much more replayability, and it makes you care. It makes you care more about the world and the characters and the faction you're playing as. Now, the story in Total War Warhammer 2 isn't on the same level as something like Command and Conquer, or even the stories found in the Dawn of War campaigns. But hey, it's an improvement over having nothing at all. The story for each of the factions consists of these beautifully painted and hand-drawn cutscenes, excellently narrated over by the old man advisor returning from the first Total War Warhammer. These cutscenes and the following narration by the old man add a sense of reward and accomplishment when you complete a major goal in the campaign, finding a lost artifact, summoning a demon, completing magical rituals. And the stories of these different fantasy campaigns for each of the factions are filled with unique characters with tragic stories, moments of heroism, and betrayal. Classic fantasy tales and tropes and cliches that I just eat up. And in each of the campaigns, there is a major plot twist near the final act of the game, which kind of blew my mind. It's technically nothing new for Warhammer. They do this bait and switch plot twist near the end of their games all the time. However, it works in Total War Warhammer 2 because you get to see this plot twist from the multiple different perspectives of each of the factions. Particularly with one faction, this plot twist is very effective and takes a very interesting turn. So yeah, the newly introduced story and narrative into the campaigns of Total War Warhammer 2 is nothing groundbreaking, but it is a very welcome addition. But it greatly improves the campaign experience for Total War Warhammer 2 and adds so much more replayability, and at least had me much more engaged than with the original campaigns in the first Total War Warhammer, with little to no story outside of an introductory cutscene. In the first Total War Warhammer, I only played through and completed one campaign. I started multiple campaigns, but I only completed one, because I didn't have that drive from a narrative, from the goal of reaching an ending cutscene to keep me engaged or compelled enough to complete multiple campaigns. Sure, I'd start up multiple campaigns with each of the different factions to see all their unique statistics and mechanics and bonuses, all that jazz. But I started way more campaigns than I ever finished. With Total War Warhammer 2, I have been absolutely compelled to finish each and every one of my campaigns, because I have that story, I have that ending cutscene to play for. Now let's talk about the actual gameplay, mechanics, and content of Total War Warhammer 2, the meat and bones of the game, as it were. Starting with the campaigns, I already addressed how they are greatly improved by the actual introduction of a narrative into the campaigns, and an actual end goal outside of conquering the world, now with the introduction of the Great Vortex, a powerful magic that each of the factions want for their own purposes. The end goal of the campaign to capture the Great Vortex, which again is another excellent incentive for keeping players, myself included, to actually finish campaigns, as there's an actual tangible goal to shoot for. Not just, okay, you're dropped into the middle of the map, take over the world now. Good luck! Like in the first Total War Warhammer. As you complete story objectives, completing different rituals, slowly giving you more power and control over the Great Vortex leading up to the final battle, the final story mission. Campaigns in Total War Warhammer 2 can be somewhat more intense and dynamic, because while you are trying to complete your own rituals to take over the Vortex, the other enemy factions are performing their own rituals to take over the Vortex, so you have to find a balance of trying to complete your own rituals while trying to sabotage and engage the enemy to prolong theirs. You have to plan your turns, plan your moves much more carefully. You have to be much more calculated in Total War Warhammer 2's Great Vortex campaigns. Also, when it comes to the campaigns, there have been some noticeable improvements to the UI, the user interface. I find it to be a bit less overwhelming, a lot less cluttered, easier, simplified. And when it comes to the 4 different factions and their unique campaign experiences and statistics and abilities, all that jazz, Creative Assembly have done an excellent job at keeping each of the factions and their different campaign attributes unique and varied from one another. You do not feel like you are playing as the exact same faction in each campaign. There are different dynamics and resources you need to account for, and different strengths and weaknesses you need to compensate for. Just like the first Total War Warhammer, very good job on the variety and diversity in terms of campaign faction mechanics. And now, it's time. You've been waiting for it. I've been waiting for it. Let's talk about the 4 new factions in Total War Warhammer 2. The High Elves, the Dark Elves, the Lizardmen, and the Skaven. First up, the High Elves. I'll start with some positives. They have some extremely powerful infantry units that can really hold their own against hordes of enemies. They have powerful mages, overall powerful magical abilities, fantastic monster and cavalry units, and look at all these dragons! Look at all these dragon types, all these different flavors of dragons. I love dragons so much, and the High Elves provide some awesome dragons, and having all these different varieties, oh my god, it's like walking into a strip club and having the choice of blonde, brunette, and redhead! Oh, it's a dream come true. And finally, the High Elves have fantastic looking armor and weapon designs, especially with all the gold and the gold trimming. It looks beautiful. And with all that being said, the High Elves are boring as fuck. Compared to the other factions, the High Elves are just visually underwhelming. Their units are so bog standard and typical elf fantasy stereotypes. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we already got that in the first Total War Warhammer with the Wood Elves. At least the Wood Elves had a lot of creativity with their different units and legendary lords, while the High Elves have such boring legendary lords. The best thing about the High Elves is their monsters and cavalry. All those awesome dragons, the phoenixes, the powerful mages and magics. Like, mechanically, they're a solid, objectively good overall faction. But they are my least played faction in Total War Warhammer 2 for a reason. They are just so bland, so boring to me, outside of the choice of dragons that they have. Up next, we have the Dark Elves, which fare much better. In terms of character design, in terms of unit diversity, in terms of overall just being a unique and fun faction to play as. Legendary lords like the Witch King Malekith are extremely badass and powerful, intimidating armor, weapon, and character designs for all the units, strong and varied cavalry, devastating dark magic, and goddamn War Hydras. War Hydras are friggin' awesome. Dark Elves are just an overall very solid faction in terms of aesthetics, in terms of mechanics, in terms of just being an overall great real-time strategy faction. Dark Elves are a great faction. And then we come to the stars of the show. I'm sorry. I need to keep down my excitement. Sorry. Woo! Need to calm down. But now we have the Lizardmen! Yes! Oh, the Lizardmen! Fuck yeah, man! Woo! I have been waiting to see the Lizardmen in a Warhammer video game for years, and they're finally here, and they're beautiful! And to top it off, they don't suck as a faction. They're actually really good, if not one of the best factions in the game, or ever introduced into Total War Warhammer period, with powerful legendary lords like Mazamundi and Krok-Gar, a huge variety of different infantry units, and some of the best and most powerful monster units in the game. And aesthetically, visually, the Lizardmen are just an absolutely gorgeous and awesome faction to look at. The animations on all the different characters, whether it be lords to infantry to monsters, they're all so beautifully, wonderfully animated. They look alive. They look lifelike. And this is the first time in the history of Warhammer ever that we actually get to hear what Lizardmen sound like. And it sounds absolutely authentic. I don't know if you can't tell already, but I really love the Lizardmen. And now last, but certainly not least, finally, the Skaven, the Ratmen. It's great to see the Skaven make another triumphant return into real-time strategy, because the Skaven were in a Warhammer RTS before Total War Warhammer 2. Warhammer Mark of Chaos, but Mark of Chaos is like impossible to get, and it's almost unplayable on newer hardware and software for some reason. Outdated technology, unfortunately. So it's great to see the Skaven come back in a new Warhammer RTS. On top of that, if you've played Warhammer End Times Vermintide, you'll see a lot of familiar faces if you've played that game. Skaven slaves, clan rats, storm vermin, gutter runners, globadiers, rat ogres, all make a glorious return. The Skaven behave surprisingly a lot like the Zerg from StarCraft 2, where you're trying to overwhelm your opponent with an absolutely ridiculous amount of small, weak units. It's a very viable strategy to just build your army full of slave rats and clan rats, and just completely overwhelm your enemy with the amount of units you have on screen. It's glorious. But while the Skaven do have a lot of weak infantry, the Skaven have some surprisingly very strong artillery and monster units. Plague Claw catapults and warp lightning cannons are absolutely devastating. I've won several battles by building armies consisting of those two things alone. They may or may not be slightly overpowered. Then we have a legendary lord like Queek Headtaker, who is absolutely excellent at killing and attacking other legendary lords. Finally, we have the Skaven's ultimate unit, the Hell Pit Abomination. And holy fuck, this thing is a powerhouse. Not only is it absolutely terrifying to look at, but it has a ridiculous amount of health and kills all the things. The Skaven are overall an excellent faction, an excellent addition to Total War Warhammer. Finally, that brings us to the battle gameplay, the actual RTS real-time strategy battles between all these different units. And it's pretty much the same from the first Total War Warhammer, but I'm not complaining. The battle system, the battle mechanics, the battle gameplay in the first Total War Warhammer was fine, superb. It wasn't broken, no need fixing it. It's the same solid RTS systems and gameplay and mechanics from the first one, only this time with all the different variables and mechanics and attributes of these different factions, which create awesome, interesting dynamics and epic battles. There's so many different strategies to how you build your army. In the first Total War Warhammer, the base starter factions were all really good and unique in their own ways, but in Total War Warhammer 2, the base starter factions in the sequel, they're far more diverse, far more varied, far more unique from one another, and it makes battles and strategies and army building so much more interesting, really. And of course, this goes without saying, the actual battles themselves visually are an absolute spectacle. No other real-time strategy game out there right now does giant epic fantasy battles like Total War Warhammer. With all the excellent animations and sounds, explosions, arrows flying, corpses littering the ground, and giant monsters smacking hundreds of infantry units into the air. It's a glorious, incredibly satisfying sight to behold. And that's Total War Warhammer 2. It's just as good as its predecessor, if not better in some ways. I absolutely had a blast with Total War Warhammer 2, revisiting this universe, revisiting this game style, and enjoying and appreciating all the little tweaks and improvement that Creative Assembly have done from their predecessor to this sequel. Keep in mind, I am absolutely biased. I'm attempting to be objective, but I can't. It's Total War Warhammer. I can't. I find these games just to be so much fun, and they make me so happy. But I will say this. If you enjoy the Total War video games, if you enjoy real-time strategy video games, hell, if you just enjoy epic fantasy battles, if you love Warhammer, stuff like that, there's something to enjoy here in Total War Warhammer 2. And in the first one, I recommend both wholeheartedly, especially with the release of the completely free Mortal Empires DLC, which basically combines both games and allows the factions of both games to interact with each other on a giant campaign map and in the battles. That's fantastic value, a fantastic amount of content. Total War Warhammer 2, Total War Warhammer, the Total War Warhammer franchise and IP right now is one of, if not the best, fantasy real-time strategy video games out there. I can't recommend it enough. Anyways, this has been a video. I hope you liked the video. If you did indeed like the video in any way, shape, or form, please be sure to hit the like button. Please leave a comment in the comment section down below. I love reading comments. I'll get nearly enough comments. What are your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on Total War Warhammer 2? Let me know in the comment section down below. Please share the video on social media, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you want to help out and support me, well, there's always Patreon. Anyways, guys, this has been a video, and I'll see you all later.